We've got a pretty great program for you guys today. We're here to talk about the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance. We're here to talk about the affordable and accessible housing crisis that we are in as a city. We're here to talk about ways that we think we can make changes here in the city of Chicago to improve the situation, and certainly also to recognize the way the pandemic has worsened a lot of the housing issues that we have. So as I mentioned, my name is Alderwoman Maria Haddon. I am Alderwoman in the 49th Ward, which is primarily the Rogers Park neighborhood and also West Ridge. And I wanted to start off with just a little personal story. So when I moved to Chicago in 2004, Rogers Park was the first place that I lived. Stayed here for a year, spent a year in Humboldt Park, a year in Logan Square, and then I came back to Rogers Park. I'm not going to compete with my fellow aldermen here on the call or others, but I would argue we have one of the best neighborhoods in the city. But in 2007, when I moved back to Rogers Park, I did so, I was working and was about to start a graduate program, and I ended up buying my first home. And it was the fall of 2007. And for those of us who lived here in Chicago, where we were hit pretty hard, the fall of 2007 was a terrible time to be caught either as a new homeowner. And 2008, 2009, and 2010 was a very difficult time for anybody owning or renting in Chicago. The housing crisis turned our lives upside down. And I can say personally, as someone who was new, who was just trying to find some kind of stability and plan to live in this place for a long time, we had a developer that took our money and did not complete our building and did not complete a lot of the work that was supposed to be done. And he ended up fleeing the country with our money, with money from a lot of other projects that he had worked on. And myself and my neighbors, there were about 19 of us in a 39-unit building. We were left to fend for ourselves. This was the story of many residents throughout Chicago and throughout the country during the housing crisis. It was my first time where I found I had to organize for myself, right? I'd been volunteering, I had been involved in the neighborhood. I felt like I was a pretty engaged person, but my neighbors and I were at risk on a pretty constant basis of losing our homes. There was the personal financial crisis that I went through with income loss from work, not knowing if I could pay those bills. But there was also the real crisis of not having a system that was holding these developers and a lot of these owners accountable to make sure that people could stay in their homes. It was my first time really engaging Chicago as a city government and finding that I assumed that there were laws to protect us. I assumed that there were rules and guidelines and things to hold people accountable to make sure that people weren't thrown out of their homes, that they weren't displaced, and that people who were given money and permits and passing inspections to do work, that they actually did it. And what I learned through that experience was that a lot of that was not true. And that so many of the systems that I assumed were in place as just a general resident were not. But what I also learned was that organizing with my neighbors, getting involved with people in my community helped to strengthen our voices. We managed to get some laws changed, legislation in Springfield around condo association management. Our building was one of the first buildings that the city's law department created this bad developer task force to work to try and help us fix some of our issues. And that experience has prepared me, and I think a lot of us, for the crisis that we are currently facing. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, we were desperately in need of affordable housing units, of accessible housing units. We're seeing rents go up. We're seeing housing prices go up all around. And this was our situation, not in an emergency. We're in the pandemic. We're approaching, I think we hit our year mark, right? It's been a year since the first COVID-19 case was discovered in Chicago. And while there have been, some good emergency efforts on part of government with eviction moratoriums and with emergency housing funds, we know that we need to do more. The Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance is the updated version of Development for All. And myself, my colleagues, and the advocates that are here with you today are going to talk about and share stories of their personal experiences about why we need this ordinance. They're going to talk to you about work that they've been doing for years in some cases, right? To take this tool and to help use every tool in our toolbox for the city of Chicago to improve the ability for us to meet those affordable and accessible housing needs. So I'm happy to be here with you today to open this up, to co-host with my colleagues, Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez, Alderman Matt Martin, Alderman Andre Vasquez, Alderman Daniel Espada, and Alderman Osterman. And thank you to the Chicago Housing Initiative and all of the members for all of the work that you guys have been doing. So I will stop talking for now and turn it over to our MC, Kathleen.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathleen. I'm the housing organizer at Access Living, and I'll be emceeing today. And we want to start out by hearing struggles that everyday people and residents of Chicago are going through. And so first, I'm going to turn it over to one of my favorite people, Brittany King. And then after Brittany tells us her story, we'll open it up to hear from three of you. Brittany? While we're waiting for Brittany, does anybody else want to take the time for 1 minute to share a story about their housing struggle, and then we'll see if Brittany is ready to tell her story?
Yeah, so my story, and again, I had asked, I'm not sure if this is about the Just Cause ordinance or another ordinance that you guys are promoting. But in my case, a year ago, well, more than a year ago, I got into a dispute with my landlord, and I was forced to leave because my landlord wasn't obeying the ordinance, the residential tenant ordinance that existed. But ultimately, he still was my landlord, and he still could decide that I would leave. And so I ended up moving to Cicero. So Chicago, and I have lived in Chicago since I moved to Chicago in 77. So this is the first time since 77 that I haven't lived within the borders of the city of Chicago. And I am a fairly sophisticated person, and I was able to get legal representation, but absent a fair a just cause ordinance, there really was nothing to prevent them from evicting me.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Fred. I'm really sorry you went through that, and I think it illustrates that we do need a lot of different policies passed in the city to combat this crisis. Brittany, are you ready to go now?
Yes, fighting with Lauren, but I'm ready. Lauren, you say hi. Can you say hi, everybody? You say hi. Thank you. So, I was born actually in Evanston, and I was born and raised in Rogers Park, as Maria was talking about earlier. And so in 2007, when she found her home, I was actually still in high school. So it was not until my second year in college that I suffered a stroke. And up until that point, I was living alone on campus. So when I came home after my stroke to do therapies, Lauren, I was interested in having my own space because I have 3 brothers also. So my 3 brothers were still living at home and I didn't want to come home to that. And so through Access Living, which I joined in 2010, I got a part of the waitlist program. And then 10 years later, the month before Lauren was born in February 2019, I got an apartment in Evanston. So I was excited. We moved out there. We were actually bumped up to a 2-bedroom because of Lauren's arrival, and I was appreciative of that. However, when Lauren was born and I went back to Access Living to sign up for the voucher waitlist, I found out that when I moved back home to a situation in Evanston that I had to get away from, we were bumped off the list because we had the Evanston address. So everything got changed, and right now I'm still on the wait list. And I was told at the beginning of this year that I am on the wait list for a unit in Hyde Park, which is I like Hyde Park, but I don't want to be in Hyde Park just because my support as an Access Living and all the wonderful people there and my mom are in Lakeview and my aunt is also in Rogers Park. So there's a lot of distance from Hyde Park to Lakeview and Rogers Park, and I've heard not. While it's good that they're helping people, it's not very conducive or supportive to people who want to stay in a specific area. And the fact that they put us on a wait list for places that are out of our current dwellings is not helpful for us. And we just need more space for Lauren to run and self-explore as she does. And that's my story. Oh, also, I'm in a relationship. So TJ, who is here, but he's kind of cooling out watching me chat, he has a son. And so we seek to combine our households in the future and possibly have another child. So this ordinance would definitely help us in having access to affordable and accessible, because I may be getting a chair so I can roll and run with Lauren, housing. And this is very much a need for the city of Chicago just because of the ups and downs that have already been happening. And then I know a lot of people come into disability not knowing anything. So when you come to disability, especially as an adult, not having access to housing can be the hardest thing because for example, my whole personality change, figuring everything out on my own to this extrovert person doing the same types of things was really tricky for me. And so I feel like as an adult with a disability, the access to affordable, accessible housing would be beneficial for our mental health as well as social and emotional health.
Thank you, Brittany, for sharing that. So for those of you who might not know, the ordinance Brittany is describing, the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance, which is introduced in November by Alderman Haddon, would require more family housing. It would require that rents be low enough for people with disabilities to afford apartments, and it would require that all of the affordable units be what's called type A adaptable or accessible, which means that Brittany's family would be able to access all the apartments. So just to provide context there. I think we have time for one more person to tell a short story. If you want to type stack in the chat. Okay.
Can I share?
I'm sorry.
Can I share?
Would you like to speak?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So, my current situation, I'm kind of in the middle of grabbing some much needed essentials because I just moved, but I moved here from California a few years ago, almost 3 years, and I lived with some family members until I was able to get me an apartment, which I was through that process. I ended up on a waiting list through Connections for the Homeless, and they weren't able to place me after having me look for a place and saying I was approved for some kind of subsidy. At the time, I was driving Uber and Lyft um, while my kids were at school. I have three young ones. They're now 6, 7, and 13. And they told me I was going to be placed. I started searching for a place, and then when it really came down to it, they told me that it would have to be in the South Side area. I have no family here. So like my support system, which it would be a handful of friends, some new, some old friends were all only on the north side, Evanston, Skokie, and like Rogers Park. So I couldn't accept it, even though I really needed it. But I was able to get my own apartment in Evanston. So this landlord had me move in. The day I moved in, he had tenants that were still moving out, and they told me I must wait until they're done so I can move in. So the place wasn't renovated whatsoever. Nothing was replaced. There was no walkthrough done. And I just, I really desperately needed a home for me and my kids. So, I just let that blow over. And I just did what I had to do. As a single mom, I fell behind. I caught up. I fell behind. I caught up. This is the first year. So my lease was over March 2020. I did have a balance, but he called me and asked me to stay because it's a pandemic and I'm a nice person. So I said, this is perfect for me. I can take time and see what resources I can get. There's resources coming for, parents and children. So not my resources came my way, but eventually I was able to get caught up on the rent, and now I was ready to leave. And so I started looking for a place. I got the rent caught up around November of last year. And after that, everything was fine until January because I really decided I'm going to move. So, it's either pay the rent or use that for a security deposit. That's the reality. And I held on to that money, and I actually moved. As of February, I'm dropping off my keys, and the apartment is clear. I left it clean. There's a few garbage bags, but the snowstorm came in, so that's how I left it. When I applied for the place that I just got approved for, this landlord told me that there was an eviction on my credit from March 2020. And because he came and knocked on my door when the inquiry, the referrals were coming in for me applying for my apartments, he gets upset and comes banging on my door. His reason was to discuss and get permission to respond to the referral. Then he threatened to say negative things because I said, you don't need my permission. Do what you need to do. I'm done. So it got kind of bad, and I almost could have been denied for this place. But by the grace of God, God willing, he approved me. I was able to move out, and I got in the middle of the storm. I moved out all my things. I didn't have much help. But now I have a court date. All of a sudden, like the day I started packing, I received no eviction papers in the mail. So now I have to go to court, and it's already an eviction on my credit as of now. So it's like, there's not too much in place for me to like fight him, because I would have been a month behind, but like, shit, I just found out about the declaration form, and I don't even understand exactly how that will work or help me or benefit me in this scenario.
Okay. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm sorry you went through that. Hopefully, we can connect you with some people who might be able to help you out. But I think we're going to move on to the last housing crisis, and I'm going to turn it over to Cliff real quickly here. But first, I just want to cover what we experienced in the last housing crisis. Between 2009 and 2013, 50,000 rental units were lost to foreclosure. By 2011, 100,011 homes, or 100,011 homes were lost to foreclosure. Mayor Lightfoot's plan identified the need for 120,000 homes in 2019. And I'm going to turn it over to Cliff to talk about how the ARO failed us during that time.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cliff Helm. I am an attorney with the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. We work on equitable development and fair housing within the city. And so the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, as it said, is Chicago's premier, what they call premier inclusive housing ordinance. The general purpose and idea behind all of this is that they use these policies to create new affordable housing within areas that are seeing a lot of development, so that when a new development comes in, it would include affordable housing in it, even if the development is a for-profit development. But Chicago's version of it hasn't seen a lot of actual development happen in affordable units. So since 2007, and the city just posted this data within the last year or so, they've only built 444 units that were totally constructed. They've started construction on another 602 affordable units. And then they claim that there's another 3,000 units that have been approved. But just to put that in context, most of those units are in Lincoln Yards in the 78, which are just gigantic mega developments that got collectively between them about $2 billion in potential public subsidies. So not clear that that's enough. One of the things about the ARO, and Noah, you can go to the next slide, is that the ARO is not something that is going to fill that huge affordable housing gap that we have. 120,000 units that we need is a lot, but it can do its part. One of the things, the places where it can be really effective is getting new affordable units in areas where there is a lot of development happening. And we do want to see more of that, and hopefully we can work on that. But there are pretty significant problems with the way that we had it set up. So overwhelmingly, it produced 1-bedroom and studio apartments when there was a massive need for family-sized apartments. It also created units that were not very affordable to most people that really did need those affordable housing units. In particular, they're not very, it didn't open up many units to families of color that are potentially in need of housing. And then the last piece that it was really struggling with over the last few years is that developers in areas where there is already a lower amount of affordable housing, so areas where housing prices are high and where there's a lot of development happening, it was more profitable for the developers to pay into the in lieu of fees than it was, and then pay that amount and build market rate units. And that was more profitable for them than building the affordable units, so they obviously did that. And I think that is all I will bring up for now, but I think we'll talk about later how to address some of these core concerns.
Yeah, I think we're going to turn it over to Trish to share her perspective as a resident of Edgewater.
Thank you. Thanks for this important convening. I've lived in Edgewater for over 25 years on Winthrop, in the Winthrop and Kenmore Strip, and I've seen a lot of changes. For 11 years, I've run an experimental art space, 6018 North. And Noah, can you put the next slide? It was started here because Chicago is a very segregated city. Winthrop, Kenmore was one of the most diverse areas with people of all ages, sexual orientation, income, race, including refugees from all over the world. And Noah, next slide. So what makes it diverse? And I think it's diverse housing stock. So Noah, if you can just go through some of these slides. They're old single family homes, 4+1, Section 8 apartments, and luxury condos. But that mix has changed. 10 years ago, signs were how owners found tenants, with people walking by and word of mouth. The next slide. But with Cedar Flats sprucing up buildings, it's since been sold to CLK. And using Domo.com or any other internet sites, those from out of the area priced out of downtown could find their new apartment. And can you go to the next slide? And other owners saw their prices that Cedar Flats was getting put in gyms, painted, and raised prices. So you can see these prices here. And Noah, can you go to the next slide? So also at the time, there was also a huge condo conversion, and it's very cheap to knock down a large home, and a push for safety to clean the neighborhood of drugs. But as you probably do, smell more pot than ever. It's just a different user, someone who looks more like me. So the next slide, please. Since 2000, Edgewater has lost about 2,700 or 50% of the community area's rental units, primarily to condo conversions. And this slide and the next slide and the previous slide are all from Marcia Holland from Edgewater Historical Society. So Noah, next slide. And you can see the area and the displacement pressure. Next slide. It's cheap and quick to knock down a single family home. And in this case on the right, it wasn't easy to knock down this affordable housing, but it is easy to knock down a single family home and build a high-rise condo. And so what can be done? Next slide, please. So definitely support the Chicago inclusive, can you go back just one? Support the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance, keep existing affordable housing, and build affordable housing, and slow the process of tear downs, have plans and financing in place before the buildings can be demoed. So the Edgewater Historical Society stopped the developer from demolishing our building because it was orange rated. And if financing had been in place, Chicago House, right, pictured here, would still be housing those going through gender transitioning. And now it's an empty lot. But when it's filled, it should be filled with affordable units. And so we definitely need, and thank you for having this conversation. You can put the next slide, to support the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance. And we've, had this screen print bag so that people can really think about that we really need to love our community through our stories, our history, and our housing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We're going to move into what the COVID-19 housing crisis looks like and how it will evolve. And I'm going to turn it over to Ali from National Equity Fund, who is also on the ARO Housing Task Force, to start that conversation.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me. I kind of just, since I'm starting off this section, I wanted to set the stage a little bit by talking about the larger impacts of the pandemic that have had on the supply side, and sort of changes that we've seen on the market so far, and what we'll likely see in the rest of 2021 and likely the couple of years after that. So the first half of 2020, as the pandemic was really picking up, was a big decline in all housing activity. There was historic lows across the board in the US with listings and showings for real estate. I think it was at some point down about 40% from the same period in 2019. But like everything else in this pandemic, it's been very unpredictable. So the decline in demand didn't lead to a decline in price because the combination of low supply of housing, as partially due to less listings and partially due to labor force shortages and stay-at-home orders, combined with the historic low mortgage rates, really increased the prices of housing across the board in basically most geographies within the US. With the second half of 2020, as it rolled on, the market demand bounced back, but the supply side remained the same, and this further exacerbated that pricing that's going up. I think a lot of some of the economic relief that the government gave to some landlords with mortgage payment pushbacks and so on have helped some of the landlords, but there's certainly now a need for longer term push towards affordability. So I think a lot of what is going to happen now with the lowering of interest within metro areas is that a lot of people are going to start to move slowly out of the metro areas, possibly, and then there's going to open room for a lot of consolidators and big companies to come in and buy medium-sized portfolios or medium-sized landlords. So this would be individuals or families or owners of about maybe like 15 to 100 units and 2 to 3 flats across different neighborhoods who have maybe struggled with rent collection or seeing vacancies within their portfolios, and they're more susceptible to selling their portfolios, and that would allow large investors to buy a lot of this housing, do some updates to the housing, and then suddenly increase the rents, making affordability in a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago even a bigger issue. So this sort of consolidation, I think, is going to be one of the points that we'll likely see in the rest of 2021 and even beyond that, as the housing market kind of is rebounding from the shock of the pandemic. That's part of why I think the ordinance that's being promoted now by the group is very important to be worked on right now, because this is kind of starting before the disaster happens. This sort of policy would preempt any big pressures on the market, so that by the time the pressure arrives, we have a policy in place that will protect lower income tenants in the neighborhood, so that people don't have to be displaced.
Thank you, Ali.
No problem.
I think we're going to move to Bhaskar Manda to give us the perspective of a small landlord.
Sure.
Bhaskar, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bhaskar Manda. I'm a housing leader with the Logan Square Neighborhood Association and also Somos Logan Square. And as Kathleen mentioned, I am also a small landlord. So I want to tell you my story from two and a half different sides. And what I'm going to tell you is going to repeat the same themes that Ali just described. So the first side of it is from the side of my tenants. Now, 2 of my tenants lost their livelihoods during the pandemic and were unable to pay rent. Now we know that right now we actually have an eviction moratorium in place. We also have a mortgage forbearance in place. And because of that, we haven't seen as many evictions, but that's only going to hold as long as these moratoriums and forbearances last. And so I anticipate a whole bunch of more evictions coming. Now let's look at it from the side of a small landlord. Why are small landlords so special? Now that's because it turns out that most affordable housing, what's termed naturally occurring affordable housing in Chicago, in Logan Square too, is from the small landlords, your 2 flats, your 3 flats. At the same time, unlike a larger rental agency, when a small landlord loses income from one tenant, it's a disproportionately higher impact on their portfolio compared to a larger landlord who has a lot more tenants, has a lot more tenants paying rent versus not paying rent. So small landlords are affected disproportionately. And the final side I want to introduce is the developer side. And I have some exposure to this side because I am on the community-driven zoning committees, both in the 35th Ward and in the 1st Ward. And I believe the 1st Ward Alderman is on the call. And I can tell you that developers slowed down a little bit, but they've been doing during the pandemic what they've always been doing. They have been snapping up properties. They have been doing their demolitions. And invariably, a demolition is followed by building luxury units because that's where the money is. Some of them have been doing deconversions, which means converting a 2-flat, a 3-flat, either tearing it down or converting it into a single-family homes because these are in great demand. And so there's another source of the loss of affordable units. But this has been going on all the time. It happened very severely along the 606. 606 is great, but it doesn't justify a 2, 3, 4 time increase in the housing prices and rents along the 606. It just isn't that great. But that's how gentrification works. Now, as I mentioned earlier, small landlords who are disproportionately impacted, just like their tenants. And then you have the developers on one side. Now, Cliff mentioned we had a big fall in housing values during the 08 crash. That has not happened during this crash. And Ali mentioned some of the reasons for that. So here's a small landlord. He's sitting on a building that, according to Zillow, and even according to what the market bears, is still worth a lot more than what the landlord paid for it. And at the same time, they have a disruption in their income. Yes, some tenants have received housing aid. My tenants, for example, have applied for aid. None of them have received it. Clearly, there's a big shortage in the aid, and who knows what Congress is going to do and when it's going to do it. So how long do we want to wait? And here are developers who are ready and willing to buy a property. So we do have, so as bad as the crisis is now, it is bound to get worse. And for all the reasons that we know, the luxury units, the deconversions, the buying up of naturally occurring affordable housing, tearing down the buildings, putting the lots together and building larger condo buildings or larger rental units is going to contribute and even strengthen gentrification in our communities. And it's going to be very different from the 08 crash. Like I mentioned, values haven't fallen down as much as in the 08 crash. So what this ARO or the stronger ARO that's being proposed can do is, as Cliff mentioned, it can ask for more family size units as opposed to the studios and 1-bedrooms. When a developer builds a building that's primarily studios and 1-bedrooms, because that's where they can get the most bang for their buck, it means that the affordable set aside in that building is also going to be mainly studio and 1-bedroom. In other words, not family size housing. So the ARO can require that, or the new ARO can require that. Can also ask for a higher percentage of affordable units. And what that does for small landlords is that it also, or rather I should say, what that does for the ward processes is that it sets an example that the people involved in community development in the wards where the aldermen have that can require the similar constraints as the ARO, such as family size units, so largest, more units set aside for affordable, more units set aside as affordable units.
I'm so sorry. I just want to make sure we're already short on time. So I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak because we're already short on time. Is that okay?
Sure. So yes, the stronger ARO will be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to move on to Marian from Paso.
Hi, my name is Marian Casillas Pabellon. I'm the executive director from Paso. And PASO is an organization that's been working for the last 14 years to improve the life of immigrant families and fighting for immigrant rights. We are really happy to be here because every opportunity in which we can come together and start establishing and recognizing what the issues that we are facing are is important. Second, especially if we are in the process of building infrastructure to face those challenges. And third, how we can use this opportunity to build tenants' power in these processes, right? Sometimes we think that, especially with housing, in the times of the pandemic, right? We think that people is not going to be willing to take X, Y, or Z action. And because the problems are so huge, right? And what is at stake is great. First of all, one of the things that we have been seeing in our organization, especially in the times of COVID, is how these eviction moratoriums really don't mean nothing. They don't mean nothing for people that is being traditionally disenfranchised. For example, we have many cases of tenants that are being harassed continuously by the landlords to be kicked out from their homes or the place or their apartment units. So they are not using legal processes or nothing like that. They are just building up pressure, calling them at weird times in the morning, getting into their units when they are not there, making sure sometimes threatening them with violence, and not to mention cutting water or trying to control thermostat, refusing to fix anything, and not providing heating for the tenants. So, and all these things have been used in ways to put pressure on them and force them to move out. So in Paso, we were looking to the models of One North Side. We were also looking at initiatives that were already happening in our Cook County area about what we can do to build power and try to build infrastructure as well. So since the issues have been established, I just wanted to share a little bit of what we do to build this. First of all, we connected people where they were at, right? We heard what the problems were and then asked them to be part of a conversation in which how we can solve these issues. We were able to stop some of the evictions by engaging in direct action. So there was ongoing work in terms of building the RTLO in the west suburbs, but in our area was really instrumental to show that power. And we did that through direct action. So it is really important. I don't want to take a lot of time, but we cannot dismiss the power of the people in making sure that we can create these conditions. It was really important that we could build leadership development strategies with them. So in the time of COVID, you have to be creative, but we don't know for how long we are going to be in the time of COVID. So we need to take action now. And we have to ask tenants what they are also willing to do and what they are willing to risk in building this power. So I want to invite you all to take action in this process. Yes, it's good that we are building an ordinance that could provide the framework to expand people's and tenants' rights, but we do need organizing strategies to make sure that those words that we put there actually are useful for folks. So we have been doing trainings and asking folks to take action, but we also need a plan to make sure that we can enforce these pieces of legislation, and we should think about those before they go into effect. So again, direct action works, organizing people works. So I want to open the door to our creativity to keep using those avenues to make changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's an important thing to say. And I just want to encourage people, because we're running short on time, to type questions into the chat that you may have, because we've covered a lot of information, and then we'll email you if you also include your email address with the question. I did want to just really quickly make sure that everybody knows that the ARO, or Affordable Requirements Ordinance, is the current law that is supposed to require the city to build affordable housing every time a new building goes up. And the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance would amend that ordinance to make it stronger and to make it actually work. And I'm going to turn it over to Noah to talk about that.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for speaking. I mean, I feel so honored and excited for the wealth of information and experience of the people on this call. But what we learned is scary. We learned that we lost hundreds of thousands of homes and rental units in the last foreclosure crisis. We learned that despite the opportunity to make up some of that affordable housing loss with the 40,000 new units that were built, the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, for the reasons that Cliff told us, didn't do its job. And now, for what Byron and Ali and Marianne talked about, we have hundreds of thousands of tenants in Illinois that are at risk of eviction. Small and medium-sized landlords won't be able to hold on. So the big developers are going to come in and they're just going to keep building. And if we don't change the Affordable Requirements Ordinance now to capture all that new development for affordable housing, for mixed income development, like Tricia talked about, we're going to be in even worse trouble than we are now. I'm going to pass it over to Byron to start talking about what changes we want to the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, like what we want in our reform, the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance. So take it away, Byron. Alderman Sikjo Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And I think it's important that we look from the ground at what's happening in the real world. I think that it's important that we listen to the residents, our constituents, the people that on the ground are experiencing the displacement, the evictions. We have thousands of evictions that are being filed. We have seen, of course, the number of foreclosures, and also the small homeowners who are struggling to make ends meet. The big benefactors of all these are the big developers. The developers who constantly talk about fiction, they don't talk about reality, they talk about profits, they talk about their bottom line, but could care less about the reality of our communities, where we have seen thousands of residents in the city of Chicago being displaced. Over 280,000 African-American residents have left the city. The mayor recently have talked about doing a call to ask residents to come back to the city of Chicago. Well, we have a recipe for Mayor Lightfoot. We got to make sure that we have a strong ARO where developers and realtors are not drafting our laws, but we are drafting them based on best practices, based on what we have seen in other cities working, where developers are held accountable and are drafting legislation. We have to make sure that we see, like in cities like New York and other cities, we have regulation and guidelines so that we can increase the number of affordable housing units by regulating the private development that it happens in our neighborhoods who are being dismantled by these developers with the promise of revenue, with the promise of growth, but that revenue and growth does not benefit our communities. We need a stronger SRO, again, that we regulate private development when we are asking for 30% affordable housing. That's something that Alderman Martin and I have been working and already having projects that are creating that. And if some developers can do it, we don't know why others can't. We also don't need pledges from developers. We need to make sure that they have legislation that makes them provide affordable housing set-asides that our community needs. Those in lieu fees are fees that never come back to the community. That is not best practices. We need family-sized, family-oriented development, not the 1 and 2 bedrooms that they promise. And we gotta revise the affordable the average median income, so that people are not left out of the projects in their own communities. We're seeing the facts in communities like Pilsen and other communities where displacement have taken a big toll in our community. Over 14,000 residents displaced in the last decade or so. We need to make sure that this is a priority to help both property owners and also with tenants. This is a matter of making sure that we have a social fabric of the city that is a city for everyone, not of those for rich developers and corporations. This is something that is not the silver bullet, but certainly the step in the right direction to make sure that we have regulation, that we create more affordable housing, so we don't see more displacement and people who are losing their homes. Because we also got to remember we have a broken property tax assessment system where developers again get the subsidies and small homeowners they have to pay the bill that they think by transfer to their tenants is going to be the solution. I got to tell you that we see small homeowners and tenants both being hurt. We got to work together. I'm glad to see some small homeowners as well supporting the tenants. We also got to make sure that we pass other legislation like just cause. We cannot allow this to be the norm and see thousands of people being evicted in the middle of a pandemic. This is our time. We got to organize and push public elected officials to commit to the ARO reform and also for just cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Cicho Lopez. Does Alderman Martin want to speak?
Sure, and I will be sure to keep it brief in the interest of time. Everybody, I'm Matt Martin. I'm the alderman in the 47th Ward, and wanted to share our office's perspective and our office's work at a high level on affordability issues. We've seen since coming into office 2 years ago in 2019 that it's been a real need to focus on affordable housing when it comes especially to the zoning and development decisions that we're making. We've seen both before and during our time in office that rising rents and property taxes have steadily pushed scores of working class and senior neighbors out of our community. We also have seen a frequent deconversion of your 2 and 3 flats into single family homes, as well as tear downs into double lots, have resulted in a significant decrease in the amount of affordable multi-bedroom housing. And we know, of course, that this isn't confined to the 47th Ward. This isn't not an issue that's unique to Ravenswood or Lincoln Square or North Center. If you look to groups like the DePaul Institute for Housing Studies, they've observed that our city has a deficit, a need for affordable housing to the tune of at least 120,000 additional units. And that was before the pandemic, so that number's only increased. That's why my office has been working to ensure that every single one of our ARO triggering developments, so every one of the developments that have 10 or plus units, has at least double the number of affordable units as the current ARO requires. So to me, that shows, as Byron just mentioned, that this isn't a conceptual issue. This is something that can and is happening. And the question is, what are city leaders going to be willing to do, in no small part by being pushed by residents, by neighbors, by folks who are disadvantaged, hurt by our existing policies. So I think it's just so important to have meetings like this to share the fact that older folks all across the city are having these conversations, are seeing the sort of developments, making the decisions that are consistent with what the inclusive housing ordinance is proposing. So look, this can happen at a citywide scale. Given the crisis that we're facing, we can't afford to wait another day. And myself, and everybody else, the leaders on this call, look forward to continuing to work with all of you to make sure that we can make this a reality in the coming months. Thanks.
Thank you. And then Alderman Vasquez, I think you're going to cover other policies we may need.
Yeah, thank you. First, I'd like to thank One Northside, our neighbors who shared their experience, good folks at the Chicago Housing Initiative, my colleagues, and all of y'all for joining us as we discuss solutions to what we know will be an exponential increase to the scale of the housing crisis we have experienced in our lifetimes. For me, it's incredibly personal as someone who has suffered displacement multiple times as a child due to gentrification. I remember the fear of not knowing why exactly we had to move, but just seeing and feeling the consequences of that trauma inflicted on a family. At an age younger than I or any kid should have been able to, I understood that like one missed bill payment, one accident that leads to hospital bills, or one hurdle could just derail our path forward and leave us unhoused. So that is what it felt like for me growing up. And that's all prior to the global pandemic and economic depression we're living in now. That's why it's incumbent upon us to find solutions that protect those who are most vulnerable in this moment and to push against the status quo solutions that have failed us in the past. It's why I'm proud to stand in solidarity with everyone here as we work to amend the Affordable Requirements Ordinance. It's also why we stand in solidarity with the Chicago Housing Justice League in making amendments to the Residential Landlord and Tenant Ordinance through the introduction of the Just Cause legislation led by my colleague, Alderman Cicho Lopez. We know that the eviction moratoriums will eventually be lifted, and that even under the moratorium, as stated earlier, we are seeing landlords who are oppressing their tenants and attempting to force illegal evictions. That cannot be allowed to continue. Just Cause would provide protections for tenants by limiting the reasons for which a landlord could seek to evict a tenant to reasons such as a domestic disturbance against other tenants or criminal activity. It also provides for relocation assistance being required for tenants based on a multiplier of the Chicago median rent so that no one is left out in the cold. With great focus and work, the legislation even seeks to address helping small landlords, those with 6 units or less, by providing partial reimbursement for relocation fees paid to their tenants. Unfortunately, Just Cause is currently languishing in the Rules Committee, but conversations with the city's Department of Housing have continued. So there is a chance to help move this forward, but we will need your help in making the public aware and talking to their alders about it, because that pressure is needed from the public. We'll be sharing more information as it all develops, knowing it'll take all of us to be successful in passing it, and that we have so many of our neighbors out there who need us in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alderman. Noah?
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, I wanted to just say the chat that's going on here is really exciting and incredible. And it's amazing to be in space with so many people that know so much about the housing crisis and have so many ideas. I want to reiterate sort of from Alderman Vasquez's point and what some of the other people said. Reforming the Affordable Requirements Ordinance by passing the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance is one step in the right direction. The crisis in 2008 that gutted our affordable housing supply, the luxury housing boom that happened since then, where we did not have a strong enough ARO to get the affordable housing, leaving us in this place now where an already horrible housing crisis before COVID is only worse. There's a lot of different things. Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance is one critical piece of the puzzle. And there are a lot of other ones as well that we need, like Alderman Vasquez and others. Right now, I want to go into some of the specific things here about the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance that we think are going to make a big difference. And hopefully it'll respond to some of the important comments that have been going on in the chat. Again, if you have questions, you can put in the chat your email address so we can follow up afterwards, or please go to bit.ly, bit.ly/pass Kaiho. Put your information in there. We'll follow up with you. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and for your patience. Let's get into some of these numbers. So one of the things we know is that a clear majority of Chicago's population is Black or Latino, about 60%. But according to the city's own data, 5 in 10 Latino households and 6 in 10 Black households can't afford a unit under the affordable requirements ordinance. The rent is too high. Those are affordable at what's called 60% of the area median income, which is a very fancy way of saying about $930 for a studio apartment, about $1,000 for a one bed. So more affordable than what you're going to get in a glass luxury tower where a studio might go for $1,500, but not affordable for someone. That's why we want to make units affordable from 20% of the area median income to 50% of the area median income. So we'd be looking at between $300 to $600 a month going up. We also just need a lot more units. And so in the most rapidly gentrifying parts of the city, we're calling for up to a third of those developments to be affordable. Again, between 20 to 50% of AMI, or about $300 to $600 per student. We also want a majority of those units to be family-sized units. Like Cliff said, the vast majority of developments have been studio and one bedroom. We have plenty of those. People getting displaced from our communities in family-sized apartments. To Kathleen's point, something that Kathleen talks about all the time is that 1% housing stock in Chicago is both affordable and accessible. We need to change that. Last but not least, and this is something that was mentioned in the chat, we need to stop the in lieu of fee. Cliff had mentioned before that developers paying out of their affordable housing requirement was one of the ways they avoided building affordable housing. But in the chat, someone's been pointing out that that money is used for affordable housing. That's true. It's not efficient. To Alderman Lopez's point, he said that money doesn't come back to our communities. That happened. In 2017, the Inspector General found that the city had just lost $4.7 million in affordable housing funds generated by the fees. But that also, but we just go to fund programs we need to keep. That's why, along with the Department of Housing, we're calling for universal density fee, sometimes known as a commercial linkage fee, as a way of getting that affordable housing funded. So the way it is right now, we only get affordable housing through residential development. People are having a hard time hearing me.
It got better.
You're fine.
Okay. We can hear you now.
I hear you.
Okay. Right now, the Affordable Requirements Ordinance only applies to residential development, meaning when there's new development, when developers get zoning changes from the public to build their developments, only if residential developers are required to provide affordable housing. Why not all developers of commercial lots, different kinds of? If we apply a universal density, so anytime the public gives you a zoning change, you have to give something back for affordable housing, then we can raise tens of millions of dollars more to offset what we're losing from those in lieu of fees. And so here's some data. In Arlington, Virginia, which is a much smaller city than Chicago, in 2013 and 2016, just 3 years, they generated $14 million. This is a powerful tool if we use it. So, we believe we need to get rid of the in lieu of fee or the opt-out fee because it prevents affordable units from getting developed and it leads to more segregation. But we definitely need to get those fees from somewhere else. We're calling for that commercial linkage fee or universal. So those are some of those specific details about the ordinance. Again, we're over time here. This has been a really, really rich conversation. So again, please fill out that bit.ly/CIHO, Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance. Pass CIHO to get involved. We need every single one of you to pass this policy and other policies that we need. So that we can stay in touch on this. And I'll pass it back to Kathleen.
Okay, I think I'm going to turn it over to Sally from Lawyers Committee for Better Housing to talk about tenants' rights in this crisis.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Sally Robinson. I'm a staff attorney with Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. I have been practicing eviction defense in New York City and Chicago for 12 years. And I want to echo the sentiments of some of the other people on this call who have talked about the importance of tenant organizing in making the kinds of reforms that really need to be made in order to ensure that housing really is treated as a human right, and we are answering that call. I, as an eviction defense attorney, am often a Band-Aid to a broader crisis. I am putting out fires. I am responding to emergencies that should never truly arise if we live in a society where we are creating. We understand that housing is a fundamental right and we value it as a protection. So unfortunately, some of the information that I'm going to give you today represents some good laws, some good protections that we have in place during the crisis. But in my view, they are far below what is needed to make sure that tenants and anybody really has humane housing and protections for humane housing. So in COVID, there's a couple of different levels of protections that are going on, a few different. At the national level, there is a moratorium on evictions, which you can avail yourself of by filling out a declaration form. However, the applicability of that moratorium is really limited when you live in a state that also has its own moratorium. In Illinois, we have our own moratorium. The governor is only authorized to renew that moratorium every 30 days. And so as has been happening since the summertime, the governor has had to make an announcement every 30 days to extend the moratorium. And each time he makes that announcement, which comes with an executive order, sometimes he'll make little changes to the protections in the ordinance. So I'm going to put a website in the chat for everybody so that you know where to go to get some of the information that I'm talking about. We at Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, we have this wonderful chat bot that's available online that you can go to interact with, that will ask you a series of questions about your locality, about your particular renter problem, and will help you figure out whether you need to take additional steps to make sure that the governor's, the Illinois statewide moratorium will protect you. So it used to be in the summertime when the governor issued the initial moratorium, that it was a moratorium that applied to all residential housing. In November or so, the governor was convinced by a contingent, I believe, of landlord lobbyists that there was some group of mythical tenants who were making a ton of money and were just withholding their rent just because the moratorium was in place. Let me be clear about all of the moratoriums too. It's a very important point. For every moratorium that I'm talking about, what it does is it stops the ability of the courts to either issue an eviction order or to execute it, meaning that the law enforcement can come to your door after the whole court process and kick you out. But what these moratoriums do not do is they do not stop you owing rent. So in all of these cases, your rent debt, a tenant's rent debt, tenant who's lost their job to no fault of their own during the pandemic is still accruing rent debt. And that rent claim will survive after the pandemic unless that tenant can get some rental assistance. So anyway, the change to the moratorium that took place at the end of 2020 was geared to try to go after these supposed scofflaws, this, supposedly significant group of tenants who were just riding out the pandemic and hoarding their large salaries and not paying their landlords. And in truth, I believe this group of people to be a very small group of people. But it did persuade the governor to make certain changes to the statewide eviction moratorium protection. Now, the statewide protection still applies to most tenants, but in order to avail yourself of it, you may need to fill out a declaration form, and you, a tenant, may need to swear that they fell behind on rent because of COVID. They expect to make less than $99,000 this year, or $198,000 for couples. They try to make partial payments, considering some of their other expenses, which might have grown because of COVID, and that they would, if they get evicted, become homeless or have to double up. If you are interested in finding out whether or not you should fill out one of these declaration forms, I am putting the direct links to the Rentervention chatbot area that applies to the declaration. So again, that'll initiate a chatbot that you can interact with depending on your specific circumstances, that will guide you about whether or not it's a good idea to go ahead and fill those out. Now, I want to tell you this. The law, the moratorium, still requires that a landlord is supposed to give a tenant this declaration form before they start any kind of eviction process. So if a tenant might fall into the categories, the criteria that they fell behind, that they make less than $99,000 a year, et cetera, and it looks like they're eligible for protection under the moratorium, and if a landlord wants to try to go after them for that back rent, the landlord must serve them with a notification about the availability of the declaration form and give them an opportunity to fill out the declaration. If the tenant fills out the declaration and gives it to the landlord may not proceed to go forward on that non-payment case. If the tenant does not fill out the declaration form, the landlord may proceed to try to file a non-payment. And now I have to add another bell and whistle to this whole COVID situation, which is that, notwithstanding everything that I just said, they're still not supposed to be able to evict you unless you pose a health and safety threat to the property. So, most of what I just talked about was whether or not you can file and pursue an eviction case, but in almost every case, even if the landlord would be able to get into the doors of court and get in front of a judge and persuade a judge that they meet all of the exceptions to the moratorium, unless that tenant has been proven to be a danger to the other people in the building or to the property an immediate danger, the order, whatever order may be issued at court, will not be able to be enforced. So the sheriff's department is usually the one who enforces evictions. Okay, I don't want to take too much time. I know you guys are already over time. So I see Doherty has asked, is this declaration form useful for someone who's behind on rent and has a lease up March 1st? I'm not quite sure. Yes, it's definitely, if you're behind on rent, definitely, I would suggest filling out a declaration form and not relying on the landlord to know about all these bells and whistles that I just described, because a lot of landlords, they're not necessarily, on all these housing listservs. Hopefully, a professional landlord understands that they need to keep up with the current law, but a lot of them don't either know or maybe don't want to follow the law. And so they may not serve the tenant as they are required to do with the copy of the declaration form. So if you're behind on rent and you want to make sure that you're protected by the moratorium, I suggest that you go ahead and fill out a declaration form. I see that there's something in the chat about the CDC language. Yeah, but this is not the CDC. What I was talking about is the Illinois Declaration, which in my view is going to be a little bit stronger to protect Illinois residents. One other thing is I want to make a mention about lockouts. Marianne mentioned lockouts earlier. Unfortunately, because there's a lot of gumming up of the works for evictions, which I'm very grateful for, in eviction court, some landlords are trying to take matters into their own hands, and they are taking illegal action, such as if a tenant has fallen behind in rent, they may think that they are entitled to just kick the tenant out by changing the locks or shutting off the heat or withholding essential services. That is not legal. That is an illegal lockout, and landlord can be subject to damages. If that happens, a tenant should call 311 or contact their police department. The police are supposed to respond in that case and issue a citation to the landlord for a lockout. But you can also contact LCBH at rentervention.com, and I'm also going to put our telephone number in the chat. And then I think I'll just leave it there, and if there's specific questions, I'll respond to those.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sally. I think, as we've been saying, because we are behind on time, everybody can just drop their email in the chat if they have a question. I thank you, everybody, for being here with us today and for the very interesting and smart conversations going on in the chat, and to all of our speakers for all of the information. And we just want to end by reminding people to use the form that Noah's been dropping continuously in the chat to email Housing Committee Chair Harry Osterman and ask him to call a hearing on the Chicago Inclusive Housing Ordinance and also the other policies we've talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Before folks go, fill out that form. If you've registered for the event, we'll have your email address. As much of this as we can, certainly for the one pager about the ordinance, we're going to translate into Spanish and email that out as well, along with other information about that we discussed today.